Hello, and welcome to The Sleep Retreat. This podcast will help you relax, unwind, and if you want to, fall asleep. If you're already familiar with the show, feel free to skip ahead to 4 minutes and 30 seconds. If you're new to using a podcast to relax or fall asleep, here is why they work. By simply listening to something other than your own racing thoughts, your mind is offered a well-deserved hiatus. It's a break from all the endless, everyday thinking and processing. And it's all delivered in the form of a moderately captivating narrative, something interesting enough to hold your mind's attention, but also gentle and bland enough to lull you to sleep. Here at the Sleep Retreat, we offer a unique and creative listener experience delivered to you in 2 seamless stages. The first stage is something we call the tuck-in. During this approximately 10-minute segment, I'll be engaging your dreamy imagination and setting you down into an immersive, serene, comfortable space, a place far, far away, perfect for dozing off. And along the way, I'll guide you with simple things you can do to further relax and prepare for pending sleep. After this stage, when we are all tucked in and comfy in this make-believe lullaby land, it's time for the next stage, the drift-off. The drift-off is when we transition together into that sleepy state of slumber. First, we are guided by the somewhat interesting, yet also delightfully monotonous narration of this week's episode, often delivered in the style of an old AM radio or other lo-fi experience. After approximately 45 minutes, the narration concludes, transitioning seamlessly into a 30-minute or longer segment featuring nothing but the continued ambient sounds from our peaceful lullaby land. These soothing background noises range from the rumble of a thunderstorm and the distant calls of seagulls to the steady hum of a car engine, all designed for continued peaceful sleep. Now, it's good to know that it's common with sleep podcasts that it might take 2 or 3 listens before your brain fully sort of trains itself to relax to this show. Once you do, though, just as children love hearing the same bedtime story over and over again, upon return here, you'll find yourself quickly feeling more relaxed and peaceful and diving towards sleep. In this first series, we will feature readings from the Warren Commission report on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Now, this might sound like an unusual choice for a bedtime story, but believe me, it works. It's a blend of intrigue and at times wonderfully dull narrative, ideal for lulling you to sleep. I should say perhaps that the first few episodes might lean a little more towards the interesting side of the equation, but as the series progresses, they get increasingly monotonous and bland, perfect for sleeping. And you can always jump ahead in the series if you would like. Other stories are coming in the future, and there are several different sleeping environments you can choose from for each episode. Try them out until you find the perfect one for you, or maybe you mix it up from day to day, depending on your mood. If you have any questions or suggestions, send an email to info@porchlightpodcast.network. Now, let's get all settled in at the Sleep Retreat. Now, let's drift off to sleep. Today, you'll be falling asleep during a thunderstorm inside of a cozy camper trailer next to a lake in the mountains. Imagine you are feeling exhausted, hot, and sweaty as you return to your camper. You've just conquered your long-held dream of hiking to the very summit of Moonrest Mountain. You've changed into your swimsuit and are now standing at the edge of the dock on weary, trembling legs, ready to celebrate your incredible achievement with a refreshing dive into the cool, crystal-clear waters of Silver Lake. With your arms raised above your head and ready to dive in, you glance at the slow-moving dark clouds on the horizon. Beads of sweat are still clinging to your forehead when you push off the dock and soar through the air before gliding perfectly into the water. The crisp, cool water envelops you, gently massaging your entire being. You can almost taste the clean, mineral freshness of the water as it washes away all the sweat, dust, and grime from your skin. While breathing in deeply, you are met with the glorious sense of renewal. You feel utterly refreshed and rejuvenated. You swim back to the dock and climb the cool aluminum ladder. Then, standing there with a soft cotton towel draped around your shoulders, you gaze out across the deep blue lake. Here and there, motorboats, canoes, sailboats, and jet skis are now headed towards the shores. Everyone knows rain is coming. Kids wearing life vests and learning how to water ski are hoisted back into boats, and the small, colorful sails of dinghies flutter in the breeze as their little suntanned captains point them back towards land. Now, all toweled off and feeling a little bit chilled, you walk barefoot back to your camper ahead of the rain. At the little picnic table, you collect your book, coffee mug, and sunglasses. You gather up other items and place them into a plastic tote. A salt and pepper shaker, a box of wooden matches, some paper plates. You secure the lid on the tote and move the Coleman lantern under the table. At the fire pit, you fold up your camping chair and tuck it below the protective cover of a tall ponderosa pine. Then you return to your camper, open the door, and step inside. In the little kitchenette, you set water to boil for tea. And then you change into your favorite, coziest leisure wear. While the hot tea steeps, you settle at the quaint table and gaze out the window, watching as boats reach the shore and families hurry off to their campers and tents and cabins. Now, with a warm cup of tea in hand and nestled in your soft, comfy clothes, you feel your body slowly warming again. You bring the mug to your lips. The fragrant steam curls around your face as you take a tiny sip. The tea is smooth, rich, and the perfect temperature. You take a bigger sip, and the tea flows down to your core, melting away the chill from the lake. A rush of warmth spreads throughout your body, like a wave of little goosebumps, and you're suddenly filled with a sense of deep accomplishment, peace, and satisfaction. Now, as you sit here at Silver Lake, let's prepare for sleep. First, close your eyes and simply become aware of your breathing, feeling your chest gently rise and fall again. Next, let's take a few deeper breaths. We will slowly fill our lungs with the cool, sweet scent of pine trees and that fresh mountain air. And then, after holding briefly, we will let it all go and exhale. Ready? Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. One more time. Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and exhale. And try thinking to yourself, as I am here at Silver Lake, I can feel gravity pulling me back towards Earth. With every exhale, I can feel the slow rotation of Earth and the Earth's steady movement around the sun. I can feel my tired feet, my ankles, my fatigued calves, my knees, and my legs becoming heavier and heavier and more relaxed. You finish the last sip of your perfect tea, and then you pick up a little pencil and notebook resting on the table. With them in hand, you make your way to the sleeping nook at the other end of the camper, where you collapse heavily into the soft, wide bed. After the long, steep hike up Moonrest Mountain, the bed feels like a soft cloud beneath your tired body. The little windows by the bed are cracked open, and your nostrils catch the pleasant scent of fresh rain on pine needles and moss. You look at your notepad and observe your to-do list. Each completed task is neatly crossed out with pencil. At the bottom of the page is one final entry on this list. A smile creeps across your face as you take the pencil and begin scribbling over that last item: climb Moonrest Mountain. You set the notepad aside, thinking how perfect everything feels at this moment. You've completed everything you set out to do here. Tomorrow holds no obligations, and for now, everything is done, finished, and complete. You have earned this wonderful moment of absolute peace. Your body sinks deeper into the soft bed. Every muscle relaxes from the tips of your fingers to the soles of your tired feet as you surrender to the peace and calm and take in the rich mountain air. Let's take a few more deep breaths before drifting off to sleep. Ready? Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. One more time. Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and exhale. Try thinking to yourself, as I lay here at Silver Lake, I can feel gravity pulling me back towards Earth. With every exhale, I experience my body feeling heavier and heavier and more relaxed. I can feel my tired arms, my hands, my torso, shoulders, neck, and head becoming heavier and more relaxed. My whole body feels at peace as gravity's pull tugs me gently and tucks me safely into this ever so soft bed. Now, feeling oh so satisfied, safe, accomplished, rejuvenated, sleepy, and happy, you reach over to a little transistor radio, tune it to your favorite station, then lay back and close your eyes.
Day, November 22nd, 1963. President John F. Kennedy, Mrs. Kennedy, and their party arrived at Love Field, Dallas, Texas. After leaving the White House on Thursday morning, the president had flown initially to San Antonio, where Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson joined the party, and the president dedicated new research facilities at the U.S. Air Force School of Aerospace Medicine. Following a testimonial dinner in Houston for U.S. Representative Albert Thomas, the president flew to Fort Worth, where he spent the night and spoke at a large breakfast gathering on Friday. Planned for later that day were a motorcade through downtown Dallas, a luncheon speech at the Trade Mart, and a flight to Austin, where the president would attend a reception and speak at a Democratic fundraising dinner. From Austin, he would proceed to the Texas ranch of the vice president. Evident on this trip were the varied roles which an American president performs: head of state, chief executive, party leader, and in this instance, prospective candidate for re-election. The Dallas motorcade, it was hoped, would evoke a demonstration of the president's personal popularity in a city which he had lost in the 1960 election. Once it had been decided that the trip to Texas would span 2 days, those responsible for planning, primarily Governor Connolly and Kenneth O'Donnell, a special assistant to the president, agreed that a motorcade through Dallas would be desirable. The Secret Service was told on November 8th that 45 minutes had been allotted to a motorcade procession from Love Field to the site of the luncheon planned by Dallas business and civic leaders in honor of the president. After considering the facilities and security problems of several buildings, the Trade Mart was chosen as the luncheon site. Given this selection, in accordance with the customary practice of affording the greatest number of people an opportunity to see the president, the motorcade route selected was a natural one. The route was approved by the local host community and White House representatives on November 18th and publicized in the local papers starting on November 19th. This advanced publicity made it clear that the motorcade would leave Main Street and pass the intersection of Elm and Houston Streets as it proceeded to the Trade Mart by way of the Stemmons Freeway. By mid-morning of November 22nd, clearing skies in Dallas dispelled the threat of rain, and the president greeted the crowds from his open limousine without the bubble top, which was at the time a plastic shield furnishing protection only against inclement weather. To the left of the president in the rear seat was Mrs. Kennedy. In the jump seats were Governor Connolly, who was in the front of the president, and Mrs. Connolly at the governor's left. Agent William R. Greer of the Secret Service was driving, and Agent Roy H. Kellerman was sitting to his right. Directly behind the presidential limousine was an open follow-up car with 8 Secret Service agents, 2 in the front seat, 2 in the rear, and 2 in each running board. These agents, in accordance with normal Secret Service procedures, were instructed to scan the crowds, the roofs, the windows of the buildings, overpasses, and crossings for signs of trouble. Behind the follow-up car was the vice presidential car, carrying the vice president and Mrs. Johnson and Senator Ralph W. Yarborough. Next were a vice presidential follow-up car and several cars and buses for additional dignitaries, press representatives, and others. The motorcade left Love Field shortly after 11:50 a.m. and proceeded through residential neighborhoods, stopping twice at the president's request to greet well-wishers among the friendly crowds. Each time the president's car halted, Secret Service agents from the follow-up car moved forward to assume a protective stance near the president and Mrs. Kennedy. As the motorcade reached Main Street, a principal east-west artery in downtown Dallas, the welcome became tumultuous. At the extreme west end of Main Street, the motorcade turned right on Houston Street and it proceeded north for 1 block in order to make a left turn on Elm Street, the most direct and most convenient approach to the Stemmons Freeway and the Trade Mart. As the president's car approached the intersection of Houston and Elm Streets, there loomed directly ahead on the intersection's northwest corner a 7-story orange brick warehouse and office building, the Texas School Book Depository. Riding in the Vice President's car, Agent Youngblood of the Secret Service noticed that the clock atop the building indicated 12:30 p.m., the scheduled arrival time at the trademark. The President's car, which had been going north, made a sharp turn towards the southwest onto Elm Street. At a speed of about 11 miles per hour, it started down the gradual descent toward a railroad overpass under which the motorcade would proceed before reaching the Stemmons Freeway. The front of the Texas School Book Depository was now on the President's right, and he waved to the crowd assembled there as he passed the building. Dealey Plaza, an open landscaped area marking the western end of downtown Dallas, stretched out to the President's left. A Secret Service agent riding in the motorcade radioed the trademark that the President would arrive in 5 minutes. Seconds later, shots resounded in a rapid succession. The President's hand moved to his neck. He appeared to stiffen momentarily and lurch slightly forward in his seat. A bullet had entered the base of the back of his neck, slightly to the right of the spine. It traveled downward and exited from the front of the neck, causing a nick in the left lower portion of the knot in the President's necktie. Before the shooting started, Governor Connolly had been facing toward the crowd on the right. He started to turn towards the left and suddenly felt a blow on his back. The governor had been hit by a bullet which entered at the extreme right side of his back at a point below his right armpit. The bullet traveled through his chest in a downward and forward direction, exited below his right nipple, passed through his right wrist, which had been in his lap, and then caused a wound on his left thigh. The force of the bullet's impact appeared to spin the governor to his right, and Mrs. Connolly pulled him down into her lap. Another bullet then struck President Kennedy at the rear portion of his head, causing a massive and fatal wound. The President fell to the left into Mrs. Kennedy's lap. Secret Service agent Clinton J. Hill, riding on the left running board of the follow-up car, heard a noise which sounded like a firecracker and saw the President suddenly lean forward and to the left. Hill jumped off the car and raced toward the President's limousine. In the front seat of the vice presidential car, Agent Youngblood heard an explosion and noticed unusual movements in the crowd. He vaulted into the rear seat and sat on the vice president in order to protect him. At the same time, Agent Kellerman, in the front seat of the presidential limousine, turned to observe the president. Seeing that the president was struck, Kellerman instructed the driver, "Let's get out of here. We're hit." He radioed ahead to the lead car, "Get us to the hospital immediately." Agent Greer immediately accelerated the presidential car. As it gained speed, Agent Hill managed to pull himself into the back of the car, where Mrs. Kennedy had climbed. Hill pushed her back into the rear seat and shielded the stricken president and Mrs. Kennedy as the president's car proceeded at high speed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, 4 miles away. At Parkland, the president was immediately treated by a team of physicians who had been alerted for the president's arrival by the Dallas Police Department as the result of a radio message from the motorcade after the shooting. The doctors noted irregular breathing movements and a possible heartbeat, although they could not detect a pulse beat. They observed the extensive wound in the president's head and a small wound approximately 1/4 inch in diameter in the lower third of his neck. Totally absorbed in the immediate task of trying to preserve the president's life, the attending doctors never turned the president over for an examination of his back. At 1 p.m., after all heart activity ceased and the last rites were administered by a priest, President Kennedy was pronounced dead. Governor Connolly underwent surgery and ultimately recovered from his serious wounds. Upon learning of the president's death, Vice President Johnson left Parkland Hospital under close guard and proceeded to the presidential plane at Love Field. Mrs. Kennedy, accompanying her husband's body, boarded the plane shortly thereafter. At 2:38 p.m., in the central compartment of the plane, Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as the 36th President of the United States by Federal District Court Judge Sarah T. Hughes. The plane left immediately for Washington, D.C., arriving at Andrews Air Force Base at 5:58 p.m. The President's body was taken to the National Naval Medical Center, where it was given a complete pathological examination. The autopsy report stated the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the head, and the bullets which struck the president were described as having been fired from a point behind and somewhat above the level of the deceased. At the scene of the shooting, there was evident confusion at the outset concerning the point of origin of the shots. Witnesses differed in their accounts of the direction from which the sound of the shots emanated. Within a few minutes, however, attention centered on the Texas School Book Depository building as a source of the shots. The building was occupied by a private corporation, the Texas School Book Depository Company, which distributed school textbooks of several publishers and leased space to representatives of the publishers. Most of the employees in the building worked for these publishers. The balance, including a 15-man warehousing crew, were employees of the Texas School Book Depository Company itself. Several eyewitnesses in front of the building reported that they saw a rifle being fired from the southeast corner window on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. One eyewitness, Howard L. Brennan, had been watching the parade from a point on Elm Street directly opposite and facing the building. He promptly told a policeman that he had seen a slender man, about 5 feet 10 inches, in his early 30s, take a deliberate aim from the 6th floor corner window and fire a rifle in the direction of the president's car. Brennan thought he might be able to identify the man since he had noticed him in the window a few minutes before the motorcade made the turn onto Elm Street. At 12:34 p.m., the Dallas police radio mentioned the depository building as a possible source of the shots, and at 12:45 p.m., the police radio broadcast a description of the suspected assassin based primarily on Brennan's observations. When the shots were fired, a Dallas motorcycle patrolman, Marion L. Baker, was riding in the motorcade at a point several cars behind the president. He had turned right from Main Street onto Houston Street and was about 200 feet south of Elm Street when he heard a shot. Baker, having recently returned from a week of deer hunting, was certain the shot came from a high-powered rifle. He looked up and saw pigeons scattering in the air from their perches on the Texas Schoolbook Depository building. He raced his motorcycle towards the building, dismounted, scanned the area to the west, and pushed his way through the spectators toward the entrance. There he encountered Roy Truly, the building superintendent, who offered Baker his help. They entered the building and ran toward the two elevators in the rear. Finding that both elevators were on the upper floor, they dashed up the stairs. Not more than 2 minutes had elapsed since the shooting. When they reached the second floor landing on their way up to the top of the building, Patrolman Baker thought he caught a glimpse of someone through a small glass window in the door separating the hall area near the stairs from the small vestibule leading into the lunchroom. Gun in hand, he rushed to the door and saw a man about 20 feet away walking towards the other end of the lunchroom. The man was empty-handed. At Baker's command, the man turned and approached him. Truly, who had started up the stairs to the third floor ahead of Baker, returned to see what had delayed the patrolman. Baker asked Truly whether he knew the man in the lunchroom. Truly replied that the man worked in the building, whereupon Baker turned from the man and proceeded with Truly up the stairs. The man they encountered had started working in the Texas Schoolbook Depository building on October 16, 1963. His fellow workers described him as very quiet, a loner. His name was Lee Harvey Oswald. Within about 1 minute after his encounter with Baker and Truly, Oswald was seen passing through the second floor offices. In his hand was a full Coke bottle, which he had purchased from a vending machine in the lunchroom. He was walking towards the front of the building, where a passenger elevator and a short flight of stairs provided access to the main entrance of the building on the first floor. Approximately 7 minutes later, at about 12:40 p.m., Oswald boarded a bus at a point on Elm Street, 7 short blocks east of the depository building. The bus was traveling west towards the very building from which Oswald had come. Its route lay through the Oak Cliff section in southwest Dallas, where it would pass 7 blocks east of the rooming house in which Oswald was living at 1026 North Beckley Avenue. On the bus was Mrs. Mary Bledsoe, one of Oswald's former landladies, who immediately recognized him. Oswald stayed on the bus approximately 3 or 4 minutes, during which time it proceeded only 2 blocks because of the traffic jam created by the motorcade and the assassination. Oswald then left the bus. A few minutes later, he entered a vacant taxi 4 blocks away and asked the driver to take him to a point on North Beckley Avenue, several blocks beyond his rooming house. The trip required 5 or 6 minutes. At about 1 p.m., Oswald arrived at the rooming house. The housekeeper, Mrs. Erlene Roberts, was surprised to see Oswald at midday and remarked to him that he seemed to be in quite a hurry. A few minutes later, Oswald emerged from his room, zipping up his jacket, and rushed out of the house. Approximately 14 minutes later, and just 45 minutes after the assassination, another violent shooting occurred in Dallas. The victim was Patrolman J.D. Tippit of the Dallas Police, an officer with a good record during his more than 11 years with the police force. He was shot near the intersection of 10th Street and Patton Avenue, about 9/10 of a mile from Oswald's rooming house. At the time of the assassination, Tippit was alone in his patrol car, the routine practice for most police patrol cars at this time of the day. He had been ordered by radio at 12:45 p.m. to proceed to the central Oak Cliff area as part of a concentration of patrol car activity around the center of the city following the assassination. At 12:54, Tippit radioed that he had moved as directed and would be available for any emergency. By this time, the police radio had broadcast several messages alerting the police to the suspect, described by Brennan at the scene of the assassination. A slender, white male, about 30 years old, 5 feet 10 inches, and weighing about 165 pounds. At approximately 1:15 p.m., Tippit was driving slowly in an easterly direction on East 10th Street in Oak Cliff. About 100 feet past the intersection of 10th Street and Patton Avenue, Tippit pulled up alongside a man walking in the same direction. The man met the general description of the suspect wanted in connection with the assassination. He walked over to Tippit's car, rested his arms on the door on the right-hand side of the car, and apparently exchanged words with Tippit through the window. Tippit opened the door on the left side and started to walk around the front of his car. As he reached the front wheel on the driver's side, the man on the sidewalk drew a revolver and fired several shots in rapid succession, hitting Tippit 4 times and killing him instantly. An automobile repairman, Domenico Benavides, heard the shots and stopped his pickup truck on the opposite side of the street, about 25 feet in front of Tippit's car. He observed the gunman start back towards Patton Avenue, removing the empty cartridge cases from the gun as he went. Benavides rushed to Tippit's side. The patrolman, apparently dead, was lying on his revolver, which was out of its holster. Benavides promptly reported the shooting to the police headquarters over the radio in Tippit's car. The message was received shortly after 1:16 p.m. As the gunman left the scene, he walked hurriedly back towards Patton Avenue and turned left, heading south. Standing on the northwest corner of 10th Street and Patton Avenue was Helen Markham, who had been walking south on Patton Avenue and had seen both the killer and Tippit cross the intersection in front of her as she waited on the curb for traffic to pass. She witnessed the shooting and then saw the man with a gun in his hand walk back towards the corner and cut across the lawn of the corner house as he started south on Patton Avenue. In the corner house itself, Mrs. Barbara Jeanette Davis and her sister-in-law, Mrs. Virginia Davis, heard the shots and rushed to the door in time to see the man walk rapidly across the lawn, shaking a revolver as if he were emptying it of cartridge cases. Later that day, each woman found a cartridge case near the house. As the gunman turned the corner, he passed alongside a taxi cab which was parked on Patton Avenue a few feet from 10th Street. The driver, William W. Scoggins, had seen the slaying and was now crouched behind his cab on the street side. As the gunman cut through the shrubbery on the lawn, Scoggins looked up and saw the man approximately 12 feet away. In his hand was a pistol, and he muttered words which sounded to Scoggins like, "Poor dumb cop," or "Poor damn cop." After passing Scoggins, the gunman crossed to the west side of Patton Avenue and ran south towards Jefferson Boulevard, a main Oak Cliff thoroughfare. On the east side of Patton, between 10th Street and Jefferson Boulevard, Ted Calloway, a used car salesman, heard the shots and ran to the sidewalk. As the man with the gun rushed past, Calloway shouted, "What's going on?" The man merely shrugged, ran onto Jefferson Boulevard, and turned right. On the next corner was a gas station with a parking lot in the rear. The assailant ran into the lot, discarded his jacket, and then continued his flight west on Jefferson. In a shoe store a few blocks farther west on Jefferson, the manager, Johnny Calvin Brewer, heard the siren of a police car moments after the radio in his store announced the shooting of the police officer in Oak Cliff. Brewer saw a man step quickly into the entranceway of the store and stand there with his back towards the street. When the police car made a U-turn and headed back in the direction of the Tippett shooting, the man left and Brewer followed him. He saw the man enter the Texas Theater, a motion picture house about 60 feet away, without buying a ticket. Brewer pointed this out to the cashier, Mrs. Julia Postal, who called the police. The time was shortly after 1:40 p.m. At 1:45 p.m., in response to Mrs. Postal's call, the police radio sounded the alarm. Have information the suspect just went into the Texas Theater on West Jefferson. Within minutes, the theater was surrounded. The house lights were then turned up. Patrolman M.N. McDonald and several other policemen approached the man who had been pointed out to them by Brewer. McDonald ordered the man to his feet and heard him say, "Well, it's all over now." The man drew a gun from his waist with one hand and struck the officer with the other. McDonald struck out with his right hand and grabbed the gun with his left hand. After a brief struggle, McDonald and several other police officers disarmed and handcuffed the suspect and drove him to police headquarters, arriving at approximately 2 p.m. Following the assassination, police cars had rushed to the Texas School Book Depository in response to the many radio messages reporting that the shots had been fired from the depository building. Inspector J. Hubert Sawyer of the Dallas Police Department arrived at the scene shortly after hearing the first of these police radio messages at 12:34 p.m. Some of the officers who had been assigned to the area of Elm and Houston Streets were talking to witnesses and watching the building when Sawyer arrived. Sawyer entered the building and rode a passenger elevator to the 4th floor, which was the top floor for this elevator. He conducted a quick search, returned to the main floor, and between approximately 12:37 and 12:40 p.m., ordered that no one be permitted to leave the building. Shortly before 1 p.m., Captain J. Will Fritz, Chief of the Homicide and Robbery Bureau of the Dallas Police Department, arrived to take charge of the investigation. Searching the 6th floor, Deputy Sheriff Luke Mooney noticed a pile of cartons on the southeast corner. He squeezed through the boxes and realized immediately that he had discovered the point from which the shots had been fired. On the floor were 3 empty cartridge cases. A carton had apparently been placed on the floor at the side of the window so that a person sitting on the carton could look down Elm Street. Between this carton and the half-open window were 3 additional cartons, arranged at such an angle that a rifle resting on the top carton would be aimed directly at the motorcade as it moved away from the building. The high stack of boxes, which first attracted Mooney's attention, effectively screened a person at the window from the view of anyone else on the floor. Mooney's discovery intensified the search for additional evidence on the 6th floor, and at 1:22 p.m., approximately 10 minutes after the cartridge cases were found, Deputy Sheriff Eugene Boone turned his flashlight in the direction of 2 rows of boxes in the northwest corner. Stuffed between the 2 rows was a bolt-action rifle with a telescopic sight. The rifle was not touched until it could be photographed. When Lieutenant J.C. Day of the Police Identification Bureau decided that the wooden stock and the metal knob at the end of the bolt contained no fingerprints, he held the rifle by the stock while Captain Fritz ejected a live shell by operating the bolt. Lieutenant Day promptly noted that stamped on the rifle itself was the serial number, C2766, as well as the markings 1940, Made Italy, and Cal 6.5. The rifle was about 40 inches long, and when disassembled, it could fit into a handmade paper sack, which, after the assassination, was found in the southeast corner of the building within a few feet of the cartridge cases. As Fritz and Day were completing their examination of this rifle on the 6th floor, Roy Truly, the building superintendent, approached with information which he felt should be brought to the attention of the police. Earlier, while the police were questioning the employees, Truly had observed that Lee Harvey Oswald, one of the 15 men who worked in the warehouse, was missing. After Truly provided Oswald's name, address, and general description, Fritz left for police headquarters. He arrived at headquarters shortly after 2 p.m. and asked 2 detectives to pick up the employee who was missing from the Texas School Book Depository. Standing nearby were the police officers who had just arrived with the man arrested in the Texas Theater. When Fritz mentioned the name of the missing employee, he learned that the man was already in their interrogation room. The missing School Book Depository employee and the suspect who had been apprehended in the Texas Theater were one and the same: Lee Harvey Oswald. The suspect Fritz was about to question in connection with the assassination of the president and the murder of a policeman was born in New Orleans on October 18, 1939, 2 months after the death of his father. His mother, Marguerite Claverie Oswald, had 2 older children. One, John Pick, was a half-brother to Lee from an earlier marriage which had ended in divorce. The other was Robert Oswald, a full brother to Lee and 5 years older. When Lee Oswald was 3, Mrs. Oswald placed him in an orphanage where his brother and half-brother were already living, primarily because she had to work. In January 1944, when Lee was 4, he was taken out of the orphanage, and shortly thereafter, his mother moved with him to Dallas, Texas, where the older boys joined them at the end of the school year. In May of 1945, Marguerite Oswald married her third husband, Edwin A. Elkdahl. While the two older boys attended a military boarding school, Lee lived at home and developed a warm attachment to Elkdahl, occasionally accompanying his mother and his stepfather on business trips around the country. Lee started school in Benbrook, Texas, but in the fall of 1946, after a separation from Elkdahl, Marguerite Oswald re-entered Lee in the first grade in Covington, Louisiana. In January 1947, while Lee was still in the first grade, the family moved to Fort Worth, Texas, as a result of an attempted reconciliation between Elkdahl and Lee's mother. A year and a half later, before Lee was 9, his mother was divorced from her third husband as a result of a divorce action instituted by Elkdahl. Lee's school record during the next 5.5 years in Fort Worth, Texas was average, although generally it grew poorer each year. The comments of teachers and others who knew him at that time do not reveal any unusual personality traits or characteristics. Another change for Lee Oswald occurred in August 1952, a few months after he completed the 6th grade. Marguerite Oswald and her 12-year-old son moved to New York City, where Marguerite's oldest son, John Pick, was stationed with the Coast Guard. The ensuing year and 1.5 in New York was marked by Lee's refusals to attend school and by emotional and psychological problems of a seemingly serious nature. Because he had become a chronic school truant, Lee underwent psychiatric study at Youth House, an institution in New York for juveniles who had truancy problems and who appeared to require psychiatric observation or other types of guidance. The social worker assigned to this case described him as seriously detached and withdrawn, and noted a rather pleasant, appealing quality about this emotionally starved, affectionless youngster. Lee expressed a feeling to the social worker that his mother did not care for him and regarded him as a burden. He experienced fantasies about being all-powerful and hurting people, but during his stay at Youth House, he was apparently not a behavior problem. He appeared withdrawn and evasive, a boy who preferred to spend his time alone, reading and watching television. His tests indicated that he was above average in intelligence for his age group. The chief psychiatric of Youth House diagnosed Lee's problem as a personality pattern disturbance with schizoid features and passive-aggressive tendencies. He concluded that the boy was an emotionally quite disturbed youngster and recommended psychiatric treatment. After having been at Youth House for 3 weeks, Lee Oswald returned to school, where his attendance and grades temporarily improved. By the following fall, however, the probation officer reported that virtually every teacher complained about the boy's behavior. His mother insisted that he did not need psychiatric assistance. Although there was apparently some improvement in Lee's behavior, during the next few months, the court recommended further treatment. In January 1954, while Lee's case was still pending, Marguerite and Lee left for New Orleans, the city of Lee's birth. Upon his return to New Orleans, Lee maintained mediocre grades but had no obvious behavior problems. Neighbors and others who knew him outside of school remembered him as a quiet, solitary, and introverted boy who read a great deal and whose vocabulary made him quite articulate. About 1 month after he started the 10th grade and 11 days before his 16th birthday in October 1955, he brought to school a note purportedly written by his mother stating that the family was moving to California. The note was written by Lee. A few days later, he dropped out of school and almost immediately tried to join the Marine Corps. Because he was only 16, he was rejected. After leaving school, Lee worked for the next 10 months at several jobs in New Orleans as an office messenger or clerk. It was during this period that he started to read communist literature. Occasionally, in conversations with others, he praised communism and expressed to his fellow employees a desire to join the Communist Party. At about this time, when he was not yet 17, he wrote to the Socialist Party of America, professing his belief in Marxism. Another move followed in July 1956, when Lee and his mother returned to Fort Worth. He re-entered high school, but again dropped out after only a few weeks, and enlisted in the Marine Corps on October 24, 1956, 6 days after his 17th birthday. On December 21, 1956, during boot camp in San Diego, Oswald fired a score of 212 for record with the M1 rifle, 2 points over the minimum for rating of sharpshooter on a marksman sharpshooter expert scale. After his basic training, Oswald received training in aviation fundamentals and then in radar scanning. Most people who knew Oswald in the Marines described him as a loner who resented the exercise of authority by others. He spent much of his free time reading. He was court-martialed once for possessing an unregistered, privately owned weapon, and on another occasion for using provocative language to a non-commissioned officer. He was, however, generally able to comply with Marine discipline. Oswald served 15 months overseas until November 1958, most of it in Japan. During his final year in the Marine Corps, he was stationed for the most part in Santa Ana, California, where he showed a marked interest in the Soviet Union and sometimes expressed politically radical views with dogmatic conviction. Oswald again fired the M1 rifle for record on May 6, 1959, and this time he shot a score of 191, only 1 point over the minimum requirement to be a marksman. According to one of his fellow Marines, Oswald was not particularly interested in his rifle performance, and his unit was not expected to exhibit the usual rifle proficiency. During this period, he expressed strong admiration for Fidel Castro and an interest in joining the Cuban army. He tried to impress those around him as an intellectual, but his thinking appeared to some as shallow and rigid. Oswald's Marine service terminated on September 11, 1959, when, at his own request, he was released from active service a few months ahead of his scheduled release. He offered as the reason for his release the ill health and economic plight of his mother. He returned to Fort Worth, remained with his mother only 3 days, and left for New Orleans, telling his mother he planned to get work there in the shipping or import-export business. In New Orleans, he booked passage on the freighter SS Marion Lakes, which sailed from New Orleans to Le Havre, France, on September 20, 1959. Lee Harvey Oswald had presumably planned this step in his life for quite some time. In March of 1959, he had applied to the Albert Schweitzer College in Switzerland for admission to the spring 1960 term. His letter of application contained many blatant falsehoods concerning his qualifications and background. A few weeks before his discharge, he had applied for and obtained a passport listing the Soviet Union as one of the countries which he planned to visit. During his service in the Marines, he had saved a comparatively large sum of money, possibly as much as $1,500, which would appear to have been accomplished by considerable frugality and apparently for a specific purpose. The purpose of the accumulated funds soon became known. On October 16, 1959, Oswald arrived in Moscow by train after crossing the border from Finland. He immediately applied for Soviet citizenship.